All right, this is the Reading Room. I'm Jeff Cook. We are starting a new book by Brené Brown. Dr. Brown is research professor at the University of Houston, where she also got her PhD in social work. She's a scholar, she's a podcaster, she is the author of multiple bestsellers, including Atlas of the Heart, 2021, which we're going to be tackling together for the next 2 months. Brown has done significant work on shame, vulnerability, and the kaleidoscopic world of emotions, and that's why we're jumping into this book. This is a text that wants to elevate our emotional vocabulary. It feels introductory on that front. As I'm reading through it, it feels very accessible, well worth discussing. This isn't going to be a scholarly book in the way that Dr. Siegel's book that we just covered was. This is much more something to jump into, kind of like a book club and discuss. And lo and behold, that's what we want to do. So this book wants to say that the language of emotion is indispensable when it comes not only to having healthy relationships, but also to knowing yourself and making wise choices. It covers 87 emotions and experiences, and as the title suggests, it wishes to provide a map, an inner map of what's going on with our emotions inside and how to navigate that. I love the idea of maps and emotions. Obviously, we started our podcast for years saying the Enneagram is a map of the human personality. Mapping emotions, very valuable task. Emotions are invisible. And unless you can develop, and she's going to point this out in the intro, unless you can develop a language for talking about such emotions, those are what they can be blind spots for us. They can be swamps for some of us. They can be ruts, but they can also, when understood properly, become playgrounds, can become what really makes life worth living. So as we jump into this book, I'm going to elevate a handful of thoughts through episodes like this that just highlight what I see as the overlap between what she is saying and Enneagram, and just try and draw those lines before we get together on Tuesday nights and have discussions. But I chose this book because I want to learn some stuff. As I've often said on this podcast, I'm not a big fan of feeling feelings and allowing them to communicate. And my hope is there are worthy ideas here to explore. And if the intro to this book is any clue, the style and quality is very high, and we should have a lot to enjoy and a lot to chew on. So with that, I'm going to elevate 15 quotes from the intro, what stood out to me, and give us a brief preview of the book. Before I do this, let me tell you what we're up to with this. On Tuesday nights through June and July, we're going to be discussing this book. If you want to be part of those discussions, these are online, I would love to have you. Go to aroundthecircle.org, sign up for a free membership. You're going to get the links to our discussions, and we would love for you to show up. You don't even have to show us your face on the Zoom. You can just listen in the background, but if you want to participate, we would love to have you. Normally, we have somewhere between 10 and 20 people show up to discuss books, and that might be for you right now. So buy the book, take a look. The first 2 discussions, again, are going to be free for all of our free members, and I would love to invite you to just come and see what we do. So aroundthecircle.org, sign up for the membership. We'll email you all the links. It's going to be good times. With that, let me jump into the intro of this book. She is going to start with a fantastic story about her past, her family, and how her family used to deal with emotions. And this kind of sets the stage for all of us to think about not only our own experience of emotions, but the environment in which we all grew up in, and how that may have been healthy, it may have been unhealthy in terms of how we processed emotions, but how important and valuable our emotional experiences were in our formative years, and how those might have been, elevated with value, but for many of us, it was not that. And her experience of her emotions and her family was certainly what she characterizes as negative. So on page 12, she said, I came across this old college paper several years ago when I was starting this book. It's not great or even a very good paper, but it knocked me off balance for a few months. Why have I been thinking about emotions for so long? Why has this always been so important? Can I even remember a time when I wasn't thinking about emotions? Love this posture of heart. This is obviously her interest. She, again, as I said earlier, she's a scholar on shame and vulnerability, has done a lot of very well-regarded work on those fronts. And is her heartbeat going to be a good guide for us? Second quote, page 14. First, nothing was discussed or normalized in my family. Not feelings of fear or periods of friend problems or puberty or money issues or extended family members who struggled with addiction and mental health issues. Nothing. We are all good. Any question or attempt to understand the things that were clearly not good was immediately shut down in punitive ways. For children, it's easy for everything to become a source of shame when nothing is normalized. You assume that if no one is talking about it, it must just be you. Entry point into two things. Elevating her emotional life matters was not honored in her family situation, but she specifically brings up shame here, obviously, and that has become a big portion of her work, which we're going to see in this book. She's going to continue on and describe the emotions of her home as intense in both the love given and in the rage she experienced. But that idea that nothing was discussed, we're all good, that's valuable. She's going to go on to say that her parents didn't have adequate tools, but she began to intuitively understand how emotions work, that she knew not only how to produce emotions in others, she knew how to predict what would happen if she produced the emotions in others. And I found that, again, it's as though she has kind of a superpower here in terms of understanding the emotional life, using the emotional life. That obviously may have some positives and some negatives to it. So, fourth quote for me, page 17. What surprised me the most was when I was growing up was how little other people seemed to understand or even think about the connection between feeling, thinking, and behavior. I remember often thinking, oh God, do you not see this coming? I didn't feel smarter or better, just weirder and pained by the amount of hurt that we are capable of causing one another. The observation powers were partly survival and partly how I'm wired. Brings up what in psychology is often called the cognitive behavioral triangle: feelings, thinking, behavior. In Enneagram world, these are obviously the centers: head, heart, gut, head, heart, body. Feeling, thinking, doing, these are essential to the human experience. If you look at our book, we spend a whole chapter, the first chapter, just outlining how this way of thinking about being a human being, head, heart, and body, is cross-cultural and appears in ancient, medieval, modern, and postmodern literature. This is simply a dominant way of coming to the human experience. And she's going to mention that triad of feeling, thinking, and behaving 5 or 6 times in this intro, which is great for us because this will be a place that Enneagram overlaps significantly with her approach to the feelings. And so I'm real hopeful here. I'm real hopeful that as she gets into it, and she, by the way, Brené Brown is, to my knowledge, an advocate for, fan of Enneagram. She wrote the intro or the foreword to an Enneagram book a few years ago, and certainly is aware of the concept, and even talked about how personally meaningful it was to her in that foreword. So we have a friend here. Fifth quote for me, page 18. As I edged into my late teens and early 20s, my powers waned, or it's probably more accurate to say my power of observation was dulled by a thick layer of beer, cigarettes, dance halls, and behavior that constantly jumped the line between girls just want to have fun and self-destructive self-medicating. Dance halls, come on, those will get you. As it turns out, being able to see what's coming doesn't make it any less painful when it arrives. In fact, knowing probably just up my anticipatory anxiety and my intolerance for vulnerability. The eggshells weren't on the ground. They were duct taped to the soles of my shoes. I could never step lightly enough or run fast enough to get away from the crackling, so I made everything around me so loud that it drowned out the sound. Over the course of several years, I learned that if understanding power and the connection between the way we feel, think, and act, there it is, was my superpower, numbing was my kryptonite. Inspired by my mom, who, after my parents' divorce, worked several jobs and started therapy, I got help, I got sober, and started doing my own work. Love the idea of work here when it comes to thinking about the emotions. Doing real business with your emotions is a lot of work. And that is like just next steps for us with Around the Circle. My Enneagram experience is seeing that doing real business with emotions is work. It's also the case, this quote, this whole page, actually the whole intro here up to page 18, if I was starting, she's been, to my knowledge, reluctant to kind of talk through her own Enneagram type. I haven't seen her say definitively this is my type, but there's a lot of language here that revolves around some big Enneagram concepts worth talking about. I have not seen her typed in the way that I would push into. I've seen lots of people say 1 and 2. That's not where I would start. So just as a side note, I thought this was interesting because that's all I've heard. I've heard that she's an Enneagram 1. She wrote this book on perfectionism, so clearly must be a 1. That wouldn't be where I would start. Anyway, next quote. Understanding and feeling those edges. This is page 19. Understanding and feeling those edges brings grace and clarity. The edges taught me, this would be the edges of talking about emotions and our relationships with others. The edges taught me that the more I used alcohol, food, work, caretaking, and whatever else I could get my hands on to numb my anxiety and vulnerability, the less I would understand my feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. There it is again. Feelings, thoughts, behaviors. I finally realized that trying to outrun and outsmart vulnerability and pain is choosing a life defined by suffering and exhaustion. Still today, the more I pay attention to my life and the messages from the edges, the more I'm able to choose a way of life that doesn't demand constant vigilance and preparedness. Those are her tools. And when there are things outside my control that do demand high alert, COVID, for example, I know running away from the pain and anxiety is way more risky than leaning in and locking eyes with it. Part of me would love, again, to talk about her motive and how that's expressed here. But much more importantly is she's setting the table for the rest of us to also get into these kinds of experiences in ourselves. We might relate really strongly to these feelings of avoiding pain and anxiety, and the tools that are required to to meet those feelings. But for some of us, that's not the issue. We got other issues. But getting into our inner life, naming the places we struggle, this can be a big part of Enneagram work. And she is setting the table for the rest of us. And I think doing so in a really comfortable, meaningful, emotionally sensitive way. I imagine this is why a lot of people really resonate with her material, is because you can feel the connection here. She is being vulnerable and allowing the rest of us to be vulnerable in kind. Next quote for me, page 20. Although I started honing my power of observation in kindergarten, I officially began studying the connection between how we think, feel, and act over 20 years ago. There it is. In some ways, a lot has changed. In other ways, not enough has changed. For example, today, if you asked me to identify the biggest barriers to developing brave leaders or cultivating courage in our families or bringing justice to communities, I'd go right back to what I believed was true about people when I was a kid. That's a big claim. This has been part of my wiring since I was young. Notice what she says. People will do almost anything to not feel pain. That's her first observation, including causing pain and abusing others. Number one. Number two, very few people can handle being held accountable without rationalizing, blaming, or shutting down. That's an interesting triad there. Rationalizing, blaming, shutting down. Thirdly, and this is most important, I think, without understanding how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors work together, it's almost impossible to find our way back to ourselves and each other. When we don't understand how our emotions shape our thoughts and decisions, we become disembodied from our own experiences and disconnected from others. Triads there, emotions, thoughts, and decisions twice. But there is your relationship with other people, and there's your relationship with yourself. She's going to highlight both. This is incredibly helpful. And that inward focus and that outward focus, huge part of the work that, we've been doing recently. If you've, been listening to some of the stuff that we did on Dr. Siegel's book on, on personality and wholeness in therapy, that inward and outward focus, what he calls a tendency, where the attention of our energy, our neurological energy is going, really, 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 really matters. Here, same overlap. Feeling, thought, behavior, inwardly looking at yourself, outwardly looking at others. There's going to be those two are very important to us being healthy human beings. She's nailing it. Next quote for me, it starts at the bottom of 20. 15 years ago, when we first introduced a curriculum based on my shame resilience research, we asked participants in the training workshop to list all of the emotions that they could recognize and name as they were experiencing them. Over the course of 5 years, we collected these surveys from more than 7,000 people. It's a big sample size. The average number of emotions named across the survey was 3. The emotions were happy, sad, and angry. I assume that just came up over and over again. The average number of emotions named was 3, and they were generally happy, sad, angry. When I think about this data, I think back to a quote from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Okay, now it's on. We're bringing in Wittgenstein. Now it's on. The limits of my language means the limits of my world. It's a good quote. The limits of my language means the limits of my world. What does it mean if the vastness of human emotion and experience can only be expressed as mad, sad, or happy? What about shame, disappointment, wonder, awe, disgust, embarrassment, despair, contentment, boredom, anxiety, stress, love, overwhelm, surprise, and all of the other emotions and experiences that define what it means to be a human? She's exactly right. It's again the case, if you're looking inwardly and your categories are just happy, sad, angry, that's not a robust way of coming to your inner life. There's not a lot of specificity there, not a lot of detail, not a lot of tools to do some real work. The limits of my language means the limits of my world. Here, what I see is it's not just about, interpersonal, communication with others. It's also your communication with yourself, about yourself, developing the details of your inner world and how you identify what's going on there. That's super helpful, I think, and really worth naming. And that's going to be the project of most of this book. She writes at the bottom of this page 21, language is our portal to meaning making, connection, healing, learning, and self-awareness. And that's exactly right. That's a existential position. That's a Sartrean position that human beings are meaning creating beings. And language is a huge part of that. Language ends up being how we elevate what's valuable and what's trash. And here, again, she's not only naming the existential process of finding meaning in your life, she's connecting it again with the heart, body, and head. Language is our portal to meaning making. Connection, your heart, healing, your body, learning, your head. These are all part of self-awareness. Love that. Language, she says, shows us that naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. It gives us the power of understanding and meaning. Yeah. If you can name it in some measure, you can control it. And one that I am, body type that I am, I love control. Especially through my head. So, next quote for me. This is the 12th quote, and this is on page 22. Likewise, having the correct words to describe specific emotions makes us better able to identify those emotions in others, as well as to recognize and manage the emotional experiences when we feel them in ourselves. Yep. Outward, inward. Notice. Doing the business with language about your emotional life allows you to connect both externally and internally, allows you to solve problems externally, but perhaps for a lot of us, even more important, internally. And again, the head, body, and heart. We recognize, we manage the emotional experiences. Something worth naming here that it's what you recognize and manage the emotional experiences. So you're having an emotional experience, and then you employ the head to recognize it and the body to manage it. The ways that the centers interact with each other, very important. In fact, so much of her work ends up being, let's think about thinking. Let's think about behavior. Let's think about the feelings and emotional life. So there's like a meta level here. But you also can have feelings about how you're feeling, or feelings about what you've done, or feelings about what you're thinking. That's really important to name. And behavior is, we could do all three. You act, and then you know better what to think about in activity. You don't know what dancing is until you do it. But once you've danced with a person, then you can think about it more clearly. Or you can, once you've danced with a person, then the emotions of what that means come into play. So anyway, those three centers, just always having a rhythm to each other, always like interpreting one another. This was a big part of Dr. Siegel's book that we just covered, the Personality and Wholeness in Therapy, that because you have these three vectors, head, heart, body, that are understanding the world from very different vantage points, they can keep each other in check, can question one another, can elevate things that might be blind to two of the centers, where one is just screaming, hey, we need to pay attention to this. All of that, I think, is very important and helpful. And she seems to be just locked into that in her language. She writes it in the middle of 22. In fact, research shows that the process of labeling emotional experiences is related to greater emotional regulation and psychosocial well-being. It's a process of labeling, that's your head, emotional experiences, that's your heart. I mean, it's not, I suppose emotional experiences can transcend all three centers, so I shouldn't say that. But process of labeling your emotional experiences leads to greater emotional regulation. Regulation is a control issue. It's about control, and control is about the body center, the intuitive center. Anyway, it's just all over that, and leads to psychosocial well-being. So it's not just about your own self-understanding, self-regulation. It's also about your connection with other human beings. I think all of this is spot on in terms of an entry point to doing some business inside of you. So where are we headed? She writes this: one area that remains under debate is how many human emotions and experiences exist. The list of emotions and experiences that I present in this book first emerged from a content analysis of commitments from an online course I was teaching that had several main sections on emotions and story. From 2013 to 2014, 66,000 participants were enrolled in the course. That was a lot of people. And there were more than 500,000 comments. The comments were de-identified, no names, and exported to spreadsheets. Don't worry, we're not going to bring up the thing that you told us in confidence. After going through the human subject's approval process, I analyzed the data using two questions. One, what are the emotions and experiences that emerge the most often? And two, which emotions and experiences do people struggle to name or label? That's helpful. This yielded approximately 150 emotions and experiences. From here, we invited a group of experienced therapists who work in diverse mental health settings to a focus group process that I led. This is where we're headed. Some of this stuff that we did, like, I beg you to go back to our movie typing podcast feed. If you look up movie typing on iTunes or on Spotify, find Inside Out. TJ and I did a deep dive into Inside Out, the movie, and we delved into, this was kind of our first, put our toe in to psychological theory. And it was one of those really helpful things for me because I noticed how much contemporary psychological theory overlaps just severely with what we see in Enneagram. And I'm just always thrilled to see it's Enneagram as a language about motivation. And just so often, some of the discoveries made, data collected, elevated, that you see in great work, like Dr. Brown's here, end up just confirming so much of that. But this is how she's coming to this material, is through that study. And then she closes, and this is really helpful. This is the section labeled "You're Here." She says, "In most of my books, I've shared the line, I'm a map maker and a traveler." It's a big identity claim there, not to type people, but I'm a map maker and a traveler. It's my way of telling you that I don't have the answers. I have data, and I use that data to chart a course that I'm sharing with you and trying to navigate at the same time. I don't have it figured out, and most of my research has surprised me and kicked my ass. That's how you know you really stumble on good data. But map making is not as easy as simply stacking data on top of data. There's an art and science to know how cartographers, those who make maps, prioritize and integrate the data. And according to one map maker, 50 to 60% of the challenge of map making is labeling the map in a way that appropriately prioritizes the, big word, right information. He explained, the interaction between the layers is the story of the map. It is the narrative structure of what we see when we read a map. The layers tell us the hierarchy of what's important. I just want to highlight it. This is my field right here. Value judgments are all over this. Right information, hierarchy of what's important. Those matter. The map maker is elevating their own impression of what is good, beautiful, true, helpful, what is important. We are value creating beings, as she said earlier, and that matters. We're meaning creating beings. The emotions get us there. I don't know that you can get to values. I don't know that you can get to ethics. I don't know if you can get to any forward motion as a human being without your emotions. Your emotions tell you, I want to connect to this person. I want to move to this other place. I want to quit my job. I want to go to sleep. Your emotions always are the gasoline that fires your behavior. Another Wittgenstein quote, the end of the Tractatus, he says, even when all of the universe's questions are answered, the question of life remains completely untouched. That's the end of his most important work. You can know all the facts and not know what you should do. That's really important to name. But emotions are the thing that gets you from here to there. Studying those emotions, allowing them to have power, it's going to be a huge part of, I imagine, what we're going to see here, at least what I see in her intro, because you're here. Here's your map. This is what's going on inside of you and in the relationships that you have, well worth naming. So she closes, this map maker told me, maps are the most important documents in human history. They give us tools to store and exchange knowledge about space and place. I know I'm a map geek, but when you said that, I got goosebumps. We're meaning makers, and a sense of place is central to meaning making. Where am I? How did I get here? How do I get there from here? Space and place. There's another element here that just hits me much harder than locational, and it's temporal. Where am I right now? How did I get here from the past? How do I get there from here in the future? All of this is time-oriented. So there's, in fact, like our experience of where I am now, where I've been, where I'm going. Those do have that location element, but that's very much what I read here is just it's temporal. It's time orientation. Time orientation is obviously a huge part of Enneagram. So I'm gonna just kind of have my radar out for that as we move forward. Love the intro to this book. I feel like the thing that is set up here in the intro that I appreciate, and for those of you who've heard my, I've done 2 book reviews through this channel here recently. I'm really critical of other people's books, and what I see here in the intro is that she's a good guide. And again, probably one of the reasons, this is the first time I'm delving into any of her work, and it's probably one of the reasons that she's trusted by so many, is that she comes across as a good guide. So the last thing I wanted to quote before we wrap this up, and again, June 9th, go to aroundthecircle.org, sign up for a free membership. We're going to start talking about chapter 1 and chapter 2 on June 9th, 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. What we're going to talk about is chapter 1. She divides these 87 emotions up into 13 different categories, and they're very interesting. The first is places we go when we're uncertain or too much, and the second is places we go when we compare. And in those 2 chapters, she's going to hit about 13 or 14 different emotions. So with the first chapter, places we go when things are uncertain or too much. We go to stress, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, avoidance, excitement, dread, fear, and vulnerability. Any of you who are familiar with our work or Enneagram are going to probably see one of the centers all over those feelings and emotions. We ain't starting with the heart center. We're probably starting somewhere else, which I find interesting, especially since it's the first chapter. This is where she wanted to start. The second is about the heart center. Places we go when we compare. Comparison, admiration, reverence, envy, jealousy, resentment, Schadenfreude, and Freudenfreude. I have to get my German on. I'm not exactly sure what those words are. We'll find out. Here's what we're going to do. When we get together and talk about this, it's not going to be, here's the head center, here's the heart center. All of us have a head. All of us have a heart. All of us have a body center. All of us have engagements of our centers. So we're going to experience these emotions no matter who we are, no matter what our motivation is, no matter what our dominant Enneagram pattern is. These emotions need to get wrestled with. Sometimes we're going to be blind to them. So I've said this countless times that I just don't experience fear and anxiety at a very high level the way that I see in other people. I'm kind of blind to it. When I hit fear and anxiety, it's almost like I got pushed into a pool and it's just suddenly there and I got to wrestle with it. But it's not part of my normal way that I'm dealing with the world. I'm always dealing with anger, and I'm sometimes dealing with shame, comparison, envy is stated here. Worthwhile places to go in terms of I see a lot of head center that we're going to talk about here in this first chapter. See a lot of heart that we're going to talk about in the second chapter. But I'm a body type, and I'm going to come to all of these emotions, and I need to do work on them. I need to do business with them, given my vantage point. So that's going to be our conversation. This is what I'd love to invite you into. Come with your type in mind, and let's talk about each of these emotions. Buy the book. I imagine it's been a while, so you might find a used copy pretty affordably somewhere, or I'm sure it's new out there. And jump in. We'll get moving. Aroundthecircle.org. Sign up for a free membership. You'll get all the links to your email, and that's what I got. So hope you have a great weekend. Happy Sunday. Look forward to talking to you in a week and a half.